This episode is brought to you by Dashlane. Try Dashlane Premium free for 30 days at dashlane.com/infographics. And never forget another password and keep all your online accounts secure. The CIA and the KGB, two Cold War juggernauts who jockeyed for advantage against each other for decades throughout the Cold War, launching countless campaigns against each other that resulted in proxy wars, assassinations, and even entire cultural revolutions. The rivalry between these two great spy agencies nonetheless very often helped prevent all-out nuclear war. But which agency was truly the greatest spy agency in the world, and which was ultimately more successful than the other during the 45 frigid years of Cold War? During World War II, American President Franklin Roosevelt was concerned about the lack of American intelligence capabilities. American isolationism, which had dictated so much of the USA's foreign policy before and after World War I, had given rise to a wholly insular attitude toward the rest of the world amongst American leadership. Thus, while great powers of Europe frequently made use of covert intelligence agents against each other, and even America, the US found itself with no such capabilities at the start of World War II. The British needed their American allies properly in the fight, and thus dispatched one of their intelligence chiefs to the US in order to teach their rebellious colonists how to undertake the dastardly acts of ungentlemanly warfare. From this initial training program, the Office of Strategic Services was born, and American commandos would undertake many daring missions throughout the war. After the war, the United States realized it could no longer afford to ignore the rest of the world, especially since Europe had developed the nasty habit of kicking off world wars every 20 years or so. To this end, the National Security Act of 1947 established both the National Security Council, which would advise the President on defense and intelligence matters, and the Central Intelligence Agency, a bona fide spy agency tasked with both peacetime and wartime intelligence gathering. While the Americans were dipping their feet into foreign intrigue, the Russians were already old hands in the art of intelligence gathering. The KGB, or the Komitet Государственной Безопасности, Committee for State Security, was formed in 1954 and formally gathered together Soviet intelligence operatives under one umbrella. Even before its start, though, the men that formed the KGB were seasoned masters of spycraft, themselves descendants of the early communist spies who helped topple the czars and establish the Soviet Union. Thanks to rising income inequality and disillusionment with capitalism throughout Europe, Soviet intelligence agents found many allies throughout the world, and by the time World War II started, they had so many agents operating inside France, Great Britain, and America that Stalin knew about his allies' military developments almost the same time they did. The KGB would itself become one of the most legendary spy agencies of all time, and develop a reputation for ruthless efficiency that made its agents feared around the world. Yet, the truth is that KGB agents were masters of their craft and could play any role they needed to masterfully. From deadly assassin to charming confidant, coaxing, manipulating, or forcing their targets to divulge their deepest secrets. Two of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies, but which is truly superior? To find out, we'll look at some of each agency's greatest successes. Americans may have been new to the spy game when the CIA was first established, but what they lacked in experience and technique, they more than made up for in sheer guts. In May 1962, CIA agents got wind that the Soviets were abandoning a research facility deep in the Arctic. While the Arctic may be significantly warmer now than it was back then, in 1962 the icy conditions were so bad that shifting ice made the base's sole runway unusable. With supplies dependent on delivery via aircraft, the decision was made to pull the researchers out while a transport aircraft could still land. With the base completely abandoned, the CIA leapt on the opportunity to gather intelligence on Soviet research. The freezing conditions had made the runway unusable once more though, and with no sign of the weather letting up and fearing that the Soviets may return when it did, the CIA decided that there was only one way to get men into the facility. They would have to parachute in despite freezing cold Arctic winds gusting at high speed. What would be a suicide mission for most turned out to be one of the greatest intelligence coups of the Cold War. Successfully parachuting down to the station in near whiteout conditions, the two CIA men immediately plundered the facility of all useful intelligence, and a few days later their plane pickup arrived. Yet there was no way the big B-17 could land on the frozen runway, which is why the CIA had developed a unique extraction technique pioneered in the Second World War but never used in the extreme conditions of the far North Arctic. The men on the ground filled 3 balloons with helium and floated them into the sky. The skyhook system, as it came to be known, was nothing more than a hook at the end of a winch, which was itself attached to the interior storage bay of an aircraft. The plane would fly the hook into a line hoisted up by the balloon, and then the entire line would be winched up into the plane. Attached to the first balloon was 150 pounds of secret Soviet equipment and documents. The 2 agents on the ground, knowing that the skyhook system was extremely dangerous and thus deciding that it was more important the secret equipment and documents be rescued than them. Despite very low visibility and strong winds, the B-17 managed to snag the first balloon and hoist it up into its cargo well, and 2 passes later the agents on the ground were themselves winched to safety. Dangling beneath a plane moving at over 150 miles per hour through Arctic weather, the CIA had just proven that any lack of experience and technique on its part was more than made up for in sheer courage and ingenuity. The data recovered showed that the Soviets had been working on techniques to detect American subs under the Arctic ice and to attack them, and it helped keep the US subs hidden from prying Soviet eyes. The United States may have led the way in computer technology, but the KGB was happy to exploit America's use of its advanced computer networks for its own benefit. In the late 1960s, the US created ARPANET, or Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. This fledgling internet was used by US research labs to share data nationally on secret defense projects. When the space shuttle was announced shortly after the successes of the Apollo program, the Soviets initially believed that the shuttle was secretly a space-based bomber, something which could threaten the entire Soviet Union. Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev immediately tasked the KGB with plundering the secrets of the shuttle and demanded that the Soviet Union's Military-Industrial Commission create their own. As work on the shuttle progressed throughout various labs across the US, the cooperating research teams made use of ARPANET to swap data back and forth. Aware of ARPANET's existence, Soviet spies in the US soon infiltrated the computer network and teased out troves of data about the shuttle, learning that it was indeed a peacetime reusable space vehicle and not a secret spaceborne bomber. Not wanting to be outdone by the US once more in the realm of space exploration, Premier Brezhnev ordered Soviet scientists to make full use of the stolen information, resulting in the Buran, a Soviet copy of the space shuttle. In many ways, the Buran is actually superior to the American shuttle, despite using stolen information from which to base their copy and the fact that it only ever flew once. This is because the American shuttle program was beset by outside pressures exerted by various politicians, and shifting priorities constantly changed what the core mission of the shuttle should be. Forced to compromise in order to achieve a wider range of capabilities rather than a specific set of objectives, the shuttle was a fundamentally flawed design. The Soviet Buran, on the other hand, benefited from a single vision that drove its development, and the fact that Soviet lawmakers left its design almost solely in the hands of its chief architect, Valentin Glushko. While the Soviet Union was training and arming North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War, it had provided great amounts of aid to the North Koreans and the Chinese during the Korean War a decade before that. The CIA got the chance to take its revenge when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Even before a single Soviet tank rolled into Afghanistan, though, American agents had already uncovered intelligence that showed the Soviets were about to invade. For 6 full months before the invasion, CIA agents were already busy training Soviet Mujahideen and arming them with modern anti-tank and anti-air equipment. Much to the surprise of the Soviet commanders, the moment their troops stepped foot into Afghanistan, they came under fire from advanced precision weapons, such as Stinger missiles, which downed nearly 300 helicopters and 100 airplanes. Grooming contacts in the Pakistani government, CIA operatives ensured that shipments of weapons, medicines, and other vital supplies made their way to Afghan warriors, who put up such a stiff resistance that the Soviet Union was forced to withdraw a decade later. While many factors played a role in the collapse of the Soviet Union and America's triumph in the Cold War, the quagmire of manpower and capital that the CIA had turned Afghanistan into for the Soviets was a key factor in bankrupting the Soviet Union. Even before the KGB's official start, though, the men who would later birth the legendary spy agency had already achieved the greatest intelligence coup of the 20th century. In the years before World War II, modern physics hinted at a bomb with a potential for explosive power that could only be described as apocalyptic. Dubbed the atomic bomb, various nations around the world launched research programs in a frantic race to be the first to develop these doomsday weapons. At the time, many of the world's top physicists lived in Germany, or territories which quickly fell under German influence, and thus they fled their homeland seeking safety in the Soviet Union, France, Great Britain, and the US. As World War II began, the British undertook a great effort to gather up as many of these brilliant physicists as they could, in order to keep them from falling into Nazi hands. The Soviet Union lacked the scientific expertise of Great Britain or the US, however, and in a bid to ensure it was not left out of the race to develop a nuclear weapon, it very quickly got to work infiltrating the nuclear programs of Great Britain and the United States. If the Soviets could not develop their own bomb, they would steal the knowledge to build one from their allies. German refugee theoretical physicist Klaus Fuchs was one of the many scientists scooped up by the British, who fully vetted the young scientist and quickly shipped him to the United States, where the world's greatest concentration of scientific genius was gathered with a single goal: beat the Nazis to a working atomic bomb. Fuchs proved an invaluable addition to the Manhattan Project, and his work sped along the development of a working bomb. Unfortunately for the US and Great Britain, though, Fuchs was also a Soviet agent. Recruited by Soviet intelligence and groomed to spy on their behalf, Fuchs was just one of many Soviet spies who had penetrated the Manhattan Project so deeply that Soviet intelligence knew of its existence even before the American FBI did. The stolen work would ensure that just 4 years after the end of World War II, the Soviet Union had its own nuclear weapon. Both the CIA and the KGB are legendary agencies in their own rights, and both sides scored incredible victories against each other throughout the 45 years of the Cold War. Yet, in the end, the KGB is widely acknowledged by intelligence officials around the world as being the superior spy agency, with capabilities so extensive that for almost 10 years the CIA feared recruiting any Soviet agents for fear of being penetrated by moles. While the US enjoyed the security of 2 oceans for the first half of the 20th century, Russian agents were fighting a covert war against their own czars, and eventually the other great powers of Europe. This vast experience helped produce one of the most sophisticated and capable spy agencies that the world has ever known. And despite its eventual end with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, its capabilities have been passed on to a new generation of intelligence agents who now work for the Russian Federal Security Bureau. The cyber war between the CIA and the FSB is already happening, and it's normal people like you and me who stand the biggest chance of getting caught in the middle. But you don't need to have the resources of an army to protect yourself. Dashlane is the one and only tool you need to keep you safe online, and their multi-country VPN lets you browse safely and privately, no matter where you are, across any device. Don't leave yourself vulnerable to digital snooping or malicious hackers. Give Dashlane and its features-packed VPN a try today. We love using Dashlane because not only does it act as a best-in-class VPN, it will send you breach alerts for when one of your online accounts is compromised by a hack. Be safe online while the rest of the internet is at war. Head over to www.dashlane.com/infographics for a free 30-day trial, and if you use the coupon code INFOGRAPHICS, you can get 10% off a premium subscription today. Which do you think is the superior spy agency, the KGB or the CIA? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great content.